My son's promotion party, I handed him a card with a key inside. He laughed, held it up for his colleagues to see, and said, "My mom still thinks a house key is a big deal." His wife covered her mouth. His boss smiled politely. And my son, the boy I worked double shifts to put through college, looked at me and said, "She's just a housekeeper. Don't mind her." I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I picked up my purse, walked through the lobby of the restaurant he'd rented for the evening, and drove home in my 12-year-old Civic with the cracked dashboard and the heater that only worked on the left side. They thought that was the end of it. It wasn't even close to the beginning. That night I sat at my kitchen table in my apartment in Decatur, Georgia, and let the quiet settle in around me. My downstairs neighbor was watching television. I could hear the laugh track through the floor. Outside, a dog was barking 2 streets over, then stopping, then starting again. I made chamomile tea, the same brand I'd been buying since 1991, and I put the key on the table in front of me and looked at it for a long time. The key opened a storage unit on Peachtree Industrial Boulevard, where I kept documents I'd never shown anyone. 31 years of paperwork, lease agreements, LLC filings, property tax receipts, mortgage payoff letters. My son knew I cleaned houses. He knew I cleaned houses since he was 9 years old, after his father left us with 4 months of back rent and a note that said he needed to find himself. What my son didn't know, what nobody in this world knew, was that I had never stopped working, and I had never stopped saving, and I had never once in 3 decades spent money on anything that didn't either feed us or build something. I pulled the folder from under the floorboard safe I'd installed myself using a YouTube tutorial in 2009. The safe was a Sentry, fireproof combination set to my son's birthday, old habit. The folder was labeled simply Portfolio. Current. I opened it to the last page. 14 properties in the greater Atlanta metro area. Paid off. Every one of them. Combined appraised value as of the previous October, $4.2 million. My son thought I was a housekeeper. He was right. I was also his landlord's landlord, though he didn't know that either. Not yet. I want to explain something before I tell you what happened next, because people always ask why. Why didn't you tell him? Why did you let him think you were poor? The answer is complicated, the way all real answers are, but the short version is this. I wanted to know who he would become without my money being part of the equation. When he was small, he saw me on my knees scrubbing baseboards. He saw me come home with my hands raw and my back aching. I thought that would teach him something. I thought it would become part of him the way it had become part of me. I was wrong about that. Somewhere around the time he started his MBA program and started dating a woman whose family had a lake house, he began to be embarrassed by me. Not suddenly. Gradually, the way water erodes stone. I'd show up to his apartment and he'd suggest we go to a coffee shop instead of letting me come upstairs. He'd mention my job to new people with a little laugh, a softening like he was pre-apologizing for me. By the time he married Rebecca, I'd learned to call before I came over. I'd learned to park a block away. I told myself it didn't matter. I was wrong about that too. The promotion party was at a restaurant called Meridian in Buckhead. Private dining room, 40 guests, open bar. My son had been made vice president of development at a commercial real estate investment firm called Harlow Capital. He was 34. Rebecca had arranged the whole evening. She texted me the dress code, business casual, with a link to a store I'd never shopped at. I wore the navy dress I bought for my cousin's retirement dinner 5 years ago. I had it dry cleaned. I thought it looked fine. I arrived with the card. Inside the card was the key, and inside the key was a secret I'd been holding for 22 years. The key was a copy I'd had made to the storage unit. My plan was to give it to him, then pull him aside and tell him quietly what it meant. That I'd been building something for him. That everything I'd saved, every property I'd bought and rented and refinanced and paid off, was for him. That the housekeeper he just made a joke of had spent 3 decades making sure he would never have to be. He didn't let me get that far. He was standing with 4 colleagues when I walked over. I'd waited for a pause in their conversation. I handed him the card. He opened it with one hand, still half turned toward his group. The key fell out into his palm, and he looked at it the way you look at something you're trying to place. like it belonged to another context. "What's this?" he said. "It's something I've been saving for you," I said. I wanted to explain when we had a minute alone. He held the key up, let it catch the light. "My mom still thinks a house key is a big deal," he said to the group. And they smiled, the polite smiles people make when they're not quite sure if something is a joke. Rebecca touched his elbow. He didn't look at me. He just said it. "She's just a housekeeper, don't mind her," and went back to the conversation. And I stood there for a moment in my dry clean dress holding a card he'd already set on the table, and then I picked up my purse and I walked out. I didn't make a scene. I never make scenes. Scenes are for people who haven't learned that dignity is something you carry with you, not something others hand you. I drove home. I made tea. I looked at the key. And then I opened my laptop. The firm my son worked for, Harlow Capital, had been doing commercial real estate acquisitions in the Atlanta area for about 8 years. I knew the name. I'd seen their yard signs on properties around the city. I had a passing awareness of their deals the way any property owner does. You notice who's buying, who's selling, who's moving into the neighborhoods where your own investments sit. I pulled up their website. Under leadership, my son's photo was third from the left. VP of Development. I looked at his face on the screen for a while. He looked confident. He looked like someone who had arrived somewhere. I looked at the rest of the page. I looked at the projects they were currently developing. I looked at the addresses. One of them stopped me. Industrial lot at 4200 Moreland Avenue SE. Planned conversion to mixed-use commercial. Under contract. I knew that address. I knew it because I owned the adjacent parcel. I'd bought it in 2018 for $190,000. A former dry cleaning facility that needed environmental remediation. Everyone told me it was a bad investment. I did the remediation anyway in phases over 3 years. The parcel was now clean, zoned light commercial, and worth somewhere between $400,000 and $600,000 depending on the buyer. Harlow Capital needed my land to complete their development footprint. Without it, their Moreland Avenue project was undersized and couldn't qualify for the commercial permits they were counting on. My son was VP of Development. I sat with that information for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and called Raymond Guzman. Raymond had been my real estate attorney for 17 years. I'd hired him when he was a young associate at a firm in Decatur, fresh out of Georgia State Law School, and I'd stayed with him when he opened his own practice. He answered on the third ring, which meant he was still in his office even though it was past 9. "Raymond," I said, "I need you to pull everything you can find on Harlow Capital, financial structure, key investors, anything that's public record, and I need it by end of week." He didn't ask why. He knew me well enough not to. "I'll have something for you by Thursday," he said. I also called Denise Webb. Denise had done bookkeeping for 2 of my LLCs for 11 years. She was meticulous and she was discreet. "I need you to look into something," I told her. "A commercial real estate firm. I want to know if the numbers add up." Raymond called me back on Wednesday. Harlow Capital was over-leveraged, significantly. They had taken on 3 large acquisitions in 18 months, using a combination of investor funding and a short-term bridge loan from a private lender in Florida. The bridge loan was coming due in 7 months. The Moreland Avenue project was their flagship deal, the one they'd used to attract their biggest investor round. Without that project proceeding on schedule, they would be in breach of their investor agreements. There was more. Denise found it on Friday. The firm's financials showed revenue that didn't fully align with the deals in their public portfolio. Small discrepancies, the kind that got buried in line items. She flagged 3 transactions where investor funds appeared to have been redirected, not to the projects they were designated for, but into operational accounts that covered compensation and overhead during a cash flow gap the previous year. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was a pattern, the kind of pattern that tended to attract attention when someone started looking. I sat with all of it for a weekend. My son was VP of Development at a firm that might be defrauding its investors. He was working on a project that required land I owned. And he had stood in a restaurant in Buckhead and told 40 people I was just a housekeeper. I thought about calling him. I thought about it seriously. I picked up the phone twice. Both times I put it back down. Not out of cruelty, out of clarity. If I called him now, he would defend them. He would explain it away. He would tell me I didn't understand commercial real estate, that I didn't understand how firms like Harlow operated, that I was being paranoid, that I was interfering in something I had no business touching. He would say it gently, with that patient tone he'd developed over the years, the tone that meant, "You're embarrassing yourself again." I needed him to see it for himself. And I needed to make sure that if the firm was doing what Denise thought it was doing, the people who'd invested their money would be protected. I also needed to decide what to do with my land. I called Raymond again on Monday morning. "Start the process for pulling the Moreland parcel from any potential sale," I said. "I'm converting it to a community use." "What kind of community use?" "Workforce training center, partnerships with the technical college, apprenticeship programs for construction trades, HVAC, electrical, free to qualifying residents." A pause. "Penelope, that parcel is worth $500,000 in the current market. I know what it's worth. And you want to put a workforce training center on it." "I do." He was quiet for a moment. "All right," he said. "I'll draft a zoning variance application." That same afternoon, I submitted a tip to the SEC's online complaint portal from a computer at the public library on Flat Shoals Avenue. I'd driven there specifically. I wasn't using my home network for this. The SEC portal was straightforward: a form, a series of fields, a place to upload supporting documents. I'd spent 2 days organizing what Denise had sent me into a clear, readable summary: transaction records, dates, account numbers, the discrepancy between designated investor funds and their actual deployment. I uploaded everything. I wrote, "I am submitting this information on behalf of parties who cannot come forward at this time. The documentation attached reflects a pattern of potential misappropriation of investor funds by Harlow Capital LLC, Atlanta, Georgia. I have no personal financial stake in the outcome of this complaint." I clicked submit. The confirmation came back with a reference number. I wrote it on a slip of paper and put it in my wallet. Then I cleared the browser history, closed all the windows, and walked out into the afternoon. My son called me 3 times that week. I let all 3 go to voicemail. The first message was casual. "Mom, haven't heard from you. Just checking in." The second was less casual. "Mom, have you been in contact with anyone about the Moreland Avenue project? Someone's been asking questions. I need to know if you have anything to do with that parcel." The third message came on a Friday evening, and his voice had changed completely. "Mom, I need to talk to you. Something is happening at the firm. I don't know what's going on. Please call me back." I listened to that last message 4 times. I was sitting on the edge of my bed in my apartment, still in my work clothes from a cleaning job I'd taken that morning. Old client, downtown condo, twice a month. I kept a few clients because I liked the work, because I was good at it, because there is nothing wrong with being good at the work you do, no matter what anyone says at a promotion party in Buckhead. I did not call him back. Not yet. 12 days after the promotion party, I was already at the Moreland Avenue parcel when my son's car pulled up. It was a Tuesday morning, overcast, the kind of Atlanta gray that looks like it's deciding whether to rain. I was standing at the edge of the lot with my site planner, a woman named Carol Reyes who'd worked on 2 of my previous adaptive reuse projects. We were looking at the preliminary layout for the training center. He got out of the car and walked toward me, and I could see from 20 yards away that something had happened. He was wearing what looked like yesterday's shirt. His jaw was set in that way it used to get when he was a teenager and something had gone wrong that he didn't know how to fix. "Mom." He stopped a few feet from me. "What are you doing here?" "I own this parcel," I said. "I'm reviewing the site plan." He looked at Carol, then back at me. "You own this land?" "Since 2018. The color shifted in his face. "This is the Moreland Avenue site. This is the adjacent parcel to—" He stopped. "Harlow has been trying to acquire this for 8 months. I know." He stared at me. "How long have you known?" "Since the night of your party." He put his hand on the back of his neck and looked at the ground. I watched him doing the math. "Mom, I need to explain something. The firm. There are some issues, some financial irregularities. I didn't know the full extent until this week, but some of the investor accounts—" He stopped again. "Someone filed a complaint with the SEC. "I see." He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw it happen the moment the math completed. Was that you? I provided information to regulators about a pattern of financial discrepancies, I said. The documentation came from public and semi-public records. He was quiet for so long I could hear traffic on Moreland from the other side of the lot. You knew, he finally said. You knew before the party. I suspected before the party. I had confirmation by the following week. Why didn't you tell me? I let that question sit for a moment before I answered it. Would you have believed me? He didn't answer immediately, and in that pause was the honest answer, which was no, probably not. You would have told me I didn't understand how the firm operated, I said, keeping my voice even. You would have told me not to interfere, and then you would have gone back to work. And when this collapsed, and it was going to collapse, you would have been standing at the center of it. His voice cracked slightly. I'm still at the center of it. No, you're at the edge of it, because the SEC complaint was submitted before the firm's next investor meeting, before they could move any more money, and because I've spent the past 2 weeks getting documentation together that shows which decisions you were part of and which ones you weren't. He stared at me. You did what? You worked on the financial structuring side. Your role was acquisitions and development. The accounts that were mishandled were managed by the CFO and the 2 founding partners. You have emails on record pushing back on a budget reallocation that happened last spring. I looked at him steadily. Raymond has everything. If investigators contact you, you call Raymond first, and you don't say a word to anyone else. He sat down on a concrete block at the edge of the site. He was quiet for a long time. A car went by on Moreland. Carol had diplomatically moved to the far end of the lot. You've been doing this, he said slowly, this whole time, building things, protecting things. For 31 years, I said. He looked up at me. How much? He stopped. Started again. How much do you actually have, Mom? 14 properties. Paid off. Appraised at $4.2 million total as of last October. I paused. Plus liquid assets. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. And I told people you were just a housekeeper. You did. At my promotion party. Yes. He didn't look away from me. I'm sorry, he said. Just that. Not the elaborate apology people make when they're trying to negotiate forgiveness. Just the 2 words, and he meant them. I sat down beside him on the concrete. The sky was still deciding about rain. I'm not angry, I said, which was mostly true. I'm sad. I've been sad for a long time about what you decided I was. I was ashamed, he said quietly. I don't say that like it's an excuse. I know it isn't. But I was ashamed of where we came from, and I wanted people to think I'd come from somewhere else. And so I started. He stopped. I started treating you like the story I'd decided to leave behind. Those words hit me somewhere deep. I let them settle. I worked double shifts, I said finally, so you would never have to apologize for where you came from. I thought if I gave you every opportunity I didn't have, you'd understand that the work behind it was something to be proud of. But I was wrong. I hid the results and not the work. I showed you the mopping and the cleaning and the long hours, but I never showed you the payoff. I never showed you what it built. I thought you'd see the dignity in the work itself, but you needed to see what the work could create. He was quiet. I still treated you wrong. Yes, you did. Is there a way back from that? I looked at the lot around us. The cleared land, the staked boundaries where the foundation of the training center would go? That depends on who you decide to be from here, I said. His phone buzzed. He looked at it and his face tightened. It's the partners. They want a call. Don't take it without Raymond on the line. He put the phone back in his pocket. I might not have a job by the end of the week. You might not, I agreed. But you'll have a clear record if you're careful. And when you're ready, there's work here. I gestured at the site. Real work, building something that helps people, if you're interested. He looked at the lot for a long moment. What are you building? Workforce training center, apprenticeships for trades, construction, electrical, HVAC, free to qualifying residents, partnerships with Georgia Piedmont Technical College. I paused. People who work with their hands, building things. People like me. He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were clearer. When do you break ground? 8 weeks. Permits are in process. And if I wanted to help, Then you show up. You do the work. You don't complain about what it looks like to the people from your old life. I looked at him. And you call your grandmother and apologize for the last 4 years of holidays where you made her feel like a burden. He flinched. She told you? She didn't have to. He nodded slowly. He picked up a small piece of broken concrete from the ground and turned it over in his hand the way people do when they need something to do with their hands while they're deciding something important. Mom, he said, the key. What did it go to? A storage unit. 31 years of documentation. Every property, every account, every decision I ever made. I looked at him. I was going to give it to you that night and explain everything, tell you what I'd built and why. Tell you it was yours eventually when you were ready for it. He was quiet for a moment. And now? Now you have to earn the readiness, I said. It doesn't change what's there, but it changes what it means when you receive it. He set the piece of concrete down carefully, like he was placing something. 3 weeks later, the SEC opened a formal investigation into Harlow Capital. The 2 founding partners were named as subjects. The CFO resigned. My son was interviewed twice by federal investigators, and both times Raymond sat beside him, and both times his answers were consistent with what the documents showed, which was that he had not been involved in the financial decisions that were under review. He was placed on administrative leave, and then, when the firm's operations effectively ceased, he was out of a job. He called me the night it became official. It's done, he said. The firm is finished. I know. Raymond told me. I have savings. About 4 months. I've been putting out applications. A pause. I also called a contact at a nonprofit development group. They do affordable housing rehabs in South Atlanta. They have a project manager role open. What does it pay? He told me. It was about a third of what he'd been making. And you applied? I submitted this afternoon. I was standing at my kitchen window watching the parking lot below. A woman I recognized from the 3rd floor was loading groceries into her trunk. 2 kids running circles around the car. Good, I said. It's a big pay cut, Mom. I know. I'm not complaining, he said quickly. I wanted you to know I'm not doing it to perform for you. I actually want to do work that... He stopped. I want to do work that means something. I know the difference, I said. I'll be able to tell. The groundbreaking for the Moreland Avenue Workforce Training Center was on a Saturday in October, cool and bright, the kind of Atlanta fall morning that almost feels like a different city. I'd kept the ceremony small. No stage, no podium, no politicians giving speeches about community investment. Just the site team, a few neighbors from the surrounding blocks, and partners from Georgia Piedmont. My son was there in work boots and a fleece. He'd gotten the nonprofit job. He'd been there 6 weeks, and he was, by all accounts, doing good work. He didn't know yet that I knew. Raymond had mentioned it in passing. I hadn't said anything. I was watching. A woman named Gloria Tran, who'd been a licensed electrician for 8 years before an injury had sidelined her and forced her into minimum wage retail work, was going to be the first instructor in the electrical apprenticeship program. She'd heard about the center through her union, and she'd come to find me at the site 3 months earlier, cap in hand, asking if I was really doing what people said I was doing. I'd given her the curriculum outline and told her to tell me what was wrong with it. She'd spent 2 weeks marking it up and sent it back. Everything she changed made it better. I hired her on the spot. Gloria stood next to me when the ceremonial first shovel went into the ground. Her daughter, 11 years old, stood on her other side, watching with an expression of careful attention that made me think she was going to remember this when she was grown. My son was at the edge of the small crowd. He was watching Gloria's daughter with an expression on his face I recognized. It was the expression of someone recalibrating, someone doing math they should have done earlier. After the ceremony, he came and stood beside me while the site team took photos, and the caterer from the church 2 blocks over set up coffee and biscuits on a folding table. Thank you for inviting me, he said. You invited yourself. That's true. A small smile. Mom, I need to ask you something. Go ahead. The night of the party, when you walked out. He paused. Did you know then what you were going to do? With the land, with the SEC, with all of it? I thought about it honestly. I knew I wasn't going to stay, I said. The rest came later. He nodded. I keep thinking about what you said, about hiding the results and not the work. I've been trying to figure out why I turned out the way I did. He shook his head slowly. I think I saw the sacrifice, and I resented it. I didn't understand it was a gift. I just saw it as evidence of everything I wanted to escape. I know, I said. I understood that too late. You're not angry at yourself for it? No, I made the choices I knew how to make. So did you. Now we make different ones. Gloria's daughter had wandered over and was looking at the construction stakes marking the building's footprint. She turned to me with the direct gaze children sometimes have before they learn to soften their questions. Is this going to be a school? She asked. A training center, I said, for people who want to learn a trade. Like what my mom does? Exactly like what your mom does. She considered this. My mom's really good at her job, she said. Like this was established fact, like it didn't occur to her that it might need defending. I looked over at Gloria, who was deep in conversation with the site foreman, making notes on a clipboard, the same kind of direct and capable engagement she'd brought to every interaction I'd had with her. She really is, I said. The girl nodded, satisfied, and went back to looking at the stakes. My son was watching her. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, I'm going to be better. You already are, I said. Keep going. That evening I returned to my apartment. The same apartment I'd lived in since he was 9 years old. The radiator in the corner ran a little hot, but I'd learned to leave the window cracked 2 inches. There was a water stain on the ceiling above the kitchen table that I'd never bothered to have repaired because it was above the place I sat every morning, and I'd come to think of it as familiar. I could move. I'd been able to move for 15 years. I stayed because this apartment was where I'd made every decision that mattered, where I'd sat with Raymond on the phone, mapping out the first LLC, where I'd signed the papers on the first property with my hands shaking because $47,000 felt like the edge of a cliff I was jumping off, where I'd watched my son leave for college with 2 duffel bags and a full ride I'd negotiated by spending 4 months writing grant applications in the evenings after shifts. I put the kettle on, I opened the safe, I pulled out the folder labeled Portfolio, Current, 14 properties, and a second folder I hadn't opened in over a year, labeled Marcus Trust, my son's name, everything, eventually, for him, when the time was right, when he'd built something of his own that had nothing to do with it. I put both folders back. I closed the safe. The kettle clicked off. I poured the water over the tea bag and stood at the window while it steeped, watching the parking lot below where the same woman from the 3rd floor was loading a different set of groceries, and her kids were running the same circles. And the ordinary world was continuing in the ordinary way it always did, underneath all the things that looked invisible, until suddenly they weren't. My son thought I was a housekeeper. He wasn't wrong. He just didn't know yet what a woman with a mop and 31 years of patience could build with the same 2 hands. Now he does. I've thought a lot about the moment Marcus held that key up under the restaurant lights and laughed, not because it still hurts. It does, a little, the way old injuries do when the weather changes, but because I understand now what he was actually doing. He wasn't mocking a key. He was trying to outrun a story he'd decided was too small for him. And the painful truth is that I had handed him the first chapter of that story every single day, on my knees with a scrub brush, without ever showing him the last page. That's the part I had to sit with. Not what he did wrong, but what I misunderstood about how people learn. I thought watching hard work would be enough. I thought the example would speak for itself. But dignity isn't absorbed by proximity. It has to be taught, named, connected to something a person can hold on to. I showed Marcus the sacrifice and hid the meaning, and so he looked at my work and saw only limitation, not architecture. That was my mistake as much as his. What I know now, what this whole long season of watching and waiting taught me, is that the choices we make when nobody is looking are the ones that define us most completely. Every property I bought alone. Every LLC filing, every permit application, every phone call to a remediation contractor on a Saturday morning, none of it was witnessed. None of it was performed. I did it because I believe that work done with integrity compounds over time, the same way interest compounds in an account nobody touches. You don't see it growing. And then one day you open the folder and the number is real. Marcus had to learn the version of that lesson that only hard experience can teach. He had to watch something he'd built on the wrong foundation come apart. He had to sit across from federal investigators and account for what he knew and what he didn't. He had to apply for a job that paid a third of his old salary and decide whether his pride could survive it. It could. That surprised him. I don't think it surprised me. What I watched happen to my son over those months wasn't punishment. It was the slow and necessary process of a person figuring out who they actually are when the external scaffolding falls away. The title, the salary, the firm with the glass lobby, none of it was him. It was just what he dressed himself in. Underneath was still the boy who used to sit at my kitchen table doing homework while I sorted receipts, who learned without knowing he was learning that you keep records. You pay attention, you don't spend what you haven't earned. That boy was still in there. He just needed the rest of it to come down first. I don't regret the 31 years. I don't regret the apartment or the double shifts or the cracked dashboard on the Civic. What I regret is the silence. The decades of letting my son believe one version of me when the fuller version might have given him something to be proud of earlier, something to measure himself against that wasn't shame. I chose concealment when I should have chosen honesty. That cost us both time we don't get back. But here is what I've come to understand about consequence. It moves in both directions. The choices that hurt us leave marks, and the choices that build us leave foundations. Marcus is 6 weeks into work that matters. Gloria Tran is designing a curriculum that will change the trajectory of people's lives. 60 families will eventually live and work in spaces that exist because I believed a piece of contaminated land in South Atlanta was worth cleaning up. None of that happened by accident. It happened because someone kept showing up, kept doing the work, kept believing that what you build with your hands and your mind and your stubbornness outlasts anything anyone says about you in a restaurant in Buckhead. My son knows that now. I made sure of it. Not with a speech, with a key and patience and enough time for the truth to become undeniable.